Emergent Strategy, written by Adrienne Marie Brown, read by Naomi Kirst-Schultz. Elements of Emergent Strategy. In both workshops and in writing this book, I've noticed that it's pretty impossible to completely separate any one of the elements of emergent strategy from the others. Or rather, at the same time, each of these elements is distinct and is totally connected to every other element. When I speak about them, they shift in my mouth. In writing this book, 7 elements became 6, and they rearranged themselves several times to land in this order. It is not random, but it's not right either, it's just where things landed. I've seen other people learning about emergence and applying it to human systems and social justice systems in the world as well, and they have made good sense to me. For example, Complex Movements is a Detroit-based artist collective supporting the transformation of communities by exploring the connections of complex science and social justice movements through multimedia interactive performance work. The Complex Movements crew uses an emblem system with ferns, ants, wavicles, mycelium, and more to engage communities in thinking about the formations and movements of the future. The particular organization of elements I present here is a snapshot of a theory in perpetual motion. This is the current configuration which gives me the most space to reflect on my experiences in social justice movements, to invite others into conversation about how we work, and to articulate my longing for something different. One of the ways I was able to identify these was by formulating my critique of the ways that social justice movements have felt, and where my longing for something else was strongest. Grace often said that every crisis is an opportunity, which is amazing theoretically and requires great emotional fortitude in practice, as well as the maturity to understand that the negative realization of that theory is disaster capitalism. Sitting with the questions of how I could transform some of the heartbreak I have experienced in nonprofit work into lessons that could offer paths forward, I found that part of the opportunity was to pay deeper attention to how the natural world has solved these same problems. I do believe what we pay attention to grows, so I wanted to stop growing the crises, the critique. The elements in this book are a way to shift my attention to the positive, to what I want to grow. I like the word biomimicry, and I love knowing that the practices of mimicking the natural world have been happening since humans came into existence. This is actually an ancient practice, a recovery rather than a discovery. The elements I explore reference aspects of the natural world operating at each of these levels, though the bulk of examples aim at the systems and processes. Quote from Janine Benyus: "Biomimicry is basically taking a design challenge and then finding an ecosystem that has already solved that challenge and is literally trying to emulate what you learn. There are 3 types of biomimicry. One is copying form and shape, another is copying a process, like photosynthesis in a leaf, and the third is mimicking at an ecosystem's level, like building a nature-inspired city." End quote. For each of these elements, we spiral from the simple understanding to the more complex ways of thinking about applying the element to our movement work. I define what the element is according to a dictionary, point out some of the places that we see this element in nature, and then offer up writing I've done on the element, moving from the personal through organizational to movement or collective levels. Toward the end is a brief assessment tool you can use to reflect on how much emergent strategy is showing up in your life and your work. Then I share some of the emergent strategy practices and tools I have worked with to create tangible differences in movement work. I'll add this because of some of the doubt I've seen people experience when approaching these concepts. Some people are more comfortable with emergent strategy than others, but I don't think this has to do with personality or with intelligence. We are already emergent beings just by our very existence, but we've been tricked away from it. Nature versus nurture is part of this. And then there is what I think of as anti-nurturing, the ways we in a Western or US context are socialized to work against respecting the emergent processes of the world and each other. For example, we learn to disrespect indigenous and direct ties to land. We learn to be quiet, polite, indirect, and submissive, not to disrupt the status quo. We learn facts out of context of application in school. How will this history, this science, this math show up in our lives in the work of growing community and home? We learn that tests and deadlines are the reasons to take action. This puts those with good short-term memories and a positive response to pressure in leadership positions, leading to urgency-based thinking regardless of the circumstance. We learn to compete with each other in a scarcity-based economy that denies and destroys the abundant world that we actually live in. We learn to deny our longings and our skills and to do work that occupies our hours without inspiring our greatness. We learn to manipulate each other and sell things to each other rather than learning to collaborate and evolve together. We learn that the natural world is to be manicured, controlled, or pillaged to support our consumerist lives. Even the natural lives of our bodies get medicated, pathologized, shaved, or improved upon with cosmetic adjustments. We learn that factors beyond our control determine the quality of our lives. Something as random as which skin, which gender, sexuality, ability, nation, or belief system we are born into sets a path for survival and quality of life. In the United States specifically, though I see this most places I travel, we learn that we only have value if we can produce. Only then do we earn food, home, healthcare, education. Similarly, we learn our organizations are only as successful as our fundraising results, whether the community impact is powerful or not. We learn as children to swallow our tears and any other inconvenient emotions, and as adults that translates into working through red flags, value differences, pain, and exhaustion. We learn to bond through gossip, through venting and destroying rather than cultivating solutions together. Perhaps the most egregious thing we are taught is that we should just be really good at what's already possible and to leave the impossible alone. Lots of people and organizations have been and are critical of these ways we socialize each other and have offered solutions. I think here of Harriet Tubman, Ella Baker, Frantz Fanon, Karl Marx, Augusto Boal, Malcolm X, the Zapatistas, and others throughout history who I believe have felt the thrum of emergence in their systems and moved what was possible in their lifetimes, such that their impacts reverberate in my life and the work of my generation. We are still mostly misdirected, turned away from the wisdom that is our inheritance. Joanna Macy speaks of the great turning, a collective awakening and shifting direction away from the wanton destruction of this planet and each other, away from those practices of separation and competition listed above towards life and abundance. I like this visual of turning and evolving as opposed to destroying the systems in place now. When Wheatley visited Detroit on a learning journey, she said systems built on greed eventually collapse on themselves, eventually topple under their own top-heavy weight. Matter doesn't disappear, it transforms. Energy is the same way. The earth is layer upon layer of all that has existed, remembered by the dirt. It is time to turn capitalism into a fossil, time to turn the soil, time to turn to the horizon together. If, as you are engaging these elements, a clearer framework appears, or an additional piece, that's good news. Let's all be conduits of the wisdom of this planet. I think any efforts to engage the emergent brilliance of our world will help with this turning, will help with liberating humanity from its current role as a virus Earth should shake off. So, without further ado, the elements. Reader's note, here is a small chart with element and nature of element as the columns. So first I will read the element and then I will read its nature of element. The first element is fractal. The nature of element is the relationship between small and large. The second element is adaptive. The nature of element is how we change. The third element is interdependence and decentralization. The nature of element is who we are and how we share. The fourth element is non-linear and iterative. The nature of element, the pace and pathways of change. The fifth is resilience and transformative justice. The nature of element, how we recover and transform. And the last element, the sixth, is creating more possibilities, how we move towards life.